Hello, so today is a wet, miserable day. I'm going to share a thought from the story of Joseph, a thought kind of about Lydia, and a tip for making quiche, and a Christian movie.
A good tip if you like making quiche that I learned from my husband is to put mini hash browns on top. They make really nice.
So last night I read Johan a quote by Sadhu Sundar Singh. He was a Christian missionary in India. So he was a Sikh who became a Christian, and he ministered a lot in India. But he has some quite neat quotes, kind of like story ones. So anyway, I read it to Johan last night, and then I was reminded of it this morning because Lydia reminded me of it. So I'll read you the quote and then I'll tell you how Lydia reminded me of it. So it says, "A little child often runs to his mother and exclaims, 'Mother, mother.' Very often the child doesn't want anything in particular. He only wants to be near his mother, to sit upon her lap or to follow her about the house for the sheer pleasure of being near her, talking to her, hearing her dear voice. Then the child is happy. His happiness doesn't consist in asking and receiving all kinds of things from his mother. If that were what he wanted, he would be impatient and obstinate and therefore unhappy. No, his happiness lies in feeling his mother's love and care, and in knowing the joy of her mother love. It is just the same with the true children of God. They do not trouble themselves so much about spiritual blessings. They only want to sit at the Lord's feet, to be in living touch with Him. And when they do that, they are supremely content." So this morning I had to take Lydia to the dental nurse, so I dropped the children off at school, and then she had an appointment about a quarter of an hour later. So we went there, and the dental nurse had told me that I need to send a message when I'm there and they would tell us when to come inside. But because it was really wet, we waited in the car, and I sent a message, but we ended up having to wait for about 15 minutes. And I was a bit impatient, but Lydia was just completely happy. Like she didn't really know what we were doing, she didn't understand what was happening, and yet she was just perfectly content, even though I was kind of impatient. And it just reminded me of this quote, how with Lydia, well, she's happy because she's with you. She doesn't need to understand everything or know what's happening. She's just perfectly content. And that's what we should be like, just content to be in God's presence. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a storm at the moment, thunder and lightning. So this morning the children were talking about what would happen if it was flooding and if they couldn't get home from school, like just imagining. And I told them about a movie that I watched once, which I quite liked. Now maybe everybody wouldn't like it, but something about it I quite liked, and it's called Secrets in the Snow. So I will put it on my favourite movies playlist and link it down below. But it's about a group of teenagers at high school who got trapped inside the school with one of their teachers because it was a really bad snow blizzard. But none of them are friends, and they all kind of get on each other's nerves, and they all have to kind of sort out all the different issues that they have with each other. But they do work through them all, and they learn to get along, and it's just quite a nice one. Now yesterday I was going to be teaching a Bible lesson at school. I do it on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings now, so I only have to do it 2 mornings rather than 4 mornings like last term. So that is quite nice. It gives me a chance to kind of relax in between, not quite so intense. But anyway, we're doing the story of Joseph at the moment. And so last Thursday was when I did that object lesson, which I shared about last week, about all things work together for good and about the chocolate cake. Then on Tuesday I did the story of when he was in Potiphar's house and Potiphar's wife accusing him and trying to get him to do what was wrong. And then yesterday we were going to be doing about Joseph in prison. It was 5:45 in the morning, and I had about half an hour or so to kind of go over my lesson and just make sure it was all fresh in my mind. And yeah, I felt kind of stuck. Like I had the story, I'd already read over it the day before, but I just didn't really feel like I had anything to share about it. I didn't feel very excited about it. I just felt very uninspired. And so I was praying about it and asking God to just give me ideas, just so that I would actually be excited about what I was teaching about. There was one other time that was like that. I was supposed to be doing the story of Enoch. We kind of have, the school I have like kind of like a lesson plan to follow, and there was supposed to be a lesson about Enoch, and I had ideas in there how to teach it, but I just felt really stuck about how to do it. And I remember this was like the day before, praying to God about it. You know, if you give me a worthwhile lesson tomorrow, that's going to be a bit of a miracle, because I just haven't got any way to teach it. And yet that ended up being one of my favorite lessons, because God did help me and He did give me ideas. And God does help you when you are stuck and when you ask Him for help. So anyway, yesterday I was praying about the story of Joseph, and God did give me ideas again, and He did help me. So I'm going to show you what I learned from the story that I shared with the kids. So we're up to the story of him being in prison. The time before, he had been in Potiphar's house, and he got put in charge because God was blessing him, and God was with him and helping him, and he seemed to do his best at whatever he did. Potiphar really liked him and could trust him and put him in charge of his whole house. And then the next thing you know, he's in prison, and but the same thing happens again. God is with him, God is helping him, and he does his best again, and the person in charge of the prison puts him in charge of the whole prison. And then this next Tuesday is going to be the story of when he gets put in charge of all of Egypt. So what I saw from it is that if he hadn't had the prison experience or the experience of being in Potiphar's house, he wouldn't have been prepared to be a manager of all of Egypt. So the experiences he had in prison and in Potiphar's house was preparing him for the bigger, more important jobs. And instead of wasting the opportunities he had in the prison and in Potiphar's house, he made the most of them, and he was faithful, and he did his best. And through that, God was preparing him for the big, important, the more important job, so it seemed, of being in charge of all of Egypt. So I think that is a really encouraging lesson. Sometimes the things we're doing may seem insignificant or unimportant. They may seem monotonous. And yet if we are faithful with them, no matter how small they are, if we are faithful, God may be preparing us for bigger things. And if we never learn to be faithful and do a good job in the smaller things, when we get the big opportunities, we won't be ready for them. And there is a Bible verse in Luke 16:10 which says, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. But he that is unjust in that which is least is unjust also in much." Can you imagine if Joseph went from being kind of a spoilt boy at 17 to being the manager of Egypt? I don't think it would have gone very well, but God was preparing him by the hard things that he went through. So whatever hard things we go through, some things can feel like being in prison. I know when Lydia was in hospital, it really felt like being in a prison. I remember another mum at the hospital saying, "Hospital's a prison, but a nice one." Sometimes we feel trapped. Sometimes we might feel like a slave in Potiphar's house. Sometimes being a mother can feel like being a slave or having to work hard, and yet it can all be preparing us for bigger and better things. Another quote, or another lesson that I taught the kids, which I actually saw this when I was getting my felt board ready. I have a felt board that you can use for any story, just about any story in the Bible. So for some reason I was looking in there's a book that goes along with the felt board, and it has all the stories, and it shows you what felt pieces to use for the story. So I was looking that up to see what pieces I needed for the story, and I saw for the story of Joseph what their kind of theme lesson in the story was. And this was what they took as a lesson from the story of Joseph. That is, we should be kind, cheerful, and diligent wherever we are. So I read it out for the kids, but I scrambled up all the letters and the words, and they had to try to figure out what the message was by unscrambling the words. But I thought that was interesting. He was kind. When the butler and the baker had their dreams and were sad, he cared about them. He asked them what was wrong, and he went he went to the effort of trying to help them, trying to find out the answer to their dreams. Yeah, it wasn't his problem. You know, he chose to care about them, and yet through doing that, that's eventually how he did get out. And Joseph, out of all the people in the Bible, he's kind of the one who had the right to feel sorry for himself. He's kind of one of the worst treated people in the Bible that I can think of, and yet his stories is one of the best in the Bible. Like, yeah, he could have so easily just been full of self-pity and feeling sorry for himself, and yet that's not how he was. He did his best wherever he was. He was kind. He was also cheerful. I don't think anybody would have put him in charge if he was a miserable person just feeling sorry for himself all the time. And he was also diligent. He did his best at whatever he did, even if it was just being a slave. So yeah, we should be kind, cheerful, and diligent wherever we are. I thought that was a good lesson from it as well. But also when he asked the wine steward or the butler to remember him when he went to the king, it was still, the man forgot about him, and it was another 2 years before he ended up getting out. And that could have been really hard to wait. Sometimes we have to wait a long time. It can feel like God's forgotten about us. But as I told the kids, like, really emphasizes in the Bible story that God was with Joseph. And if you're with somebody, you can't forget about them. Like, sometimes I pray for things and it feels like God's forgotten about me, he's not listening. And yet, if we remember that God is with us, there's no way he can forget about us. But we might have to wait until the right time, which may be a long time. You know, I think we can only be like Joseph if God is with us, if we are trusting in God. If we turn against God, then we will just be bitter and angry, like what Joseph could have ended up, what other people in the Bible ended up, like Cain and Saul. He could have been bitter and angry, but because God was with him and God was helping him, then God can give you the power not to be bitter about the bad or the sad things that happen in your life. He can help you to endure. He can help you to handle being in prison or being falsely accused, or having to work as a slave, or having to forgive your brothers. With God's help, we can do all those things. But if we turn on him and just get bitter and angry, then we won't have God's help. And without God's help, we can't do that. So if you don't understand what is happening, or you feel bitter and angry, don't turn on God. Turn to him. Ask him to help you, because he will help you. I knew I forgot something when I was talking about Joseph waiting for those 2 years in prison when the butler forgot about him. And that was that, like, he asked the man to remember him and the man forgot all about it. And I saw a comment somewhere that was teaching him not to trust in man but to trust in God. So in a way he could have trusted in the fact that the man would remember him and the man forgot. And that reminds us that we should trust in God and not trust in people to help us. And another thing, when I talked about motherhood and preparing us for bigger and greater things, I did not mean that motherhood was not great. That kind of came out a little bit wrong. Motherhood is a great thing, but we never know what God is preparing for us further down the road. And so sometimes it can seem very insignificant, changing nappies and making meals and those things, but they are important, even though they don't always feel like it. That's more my point. And also, the Bible says whatever you do it heartily as to the Lord. So sometimes we only want to do that for the big things that feel important, and yet what we can learn from Joseph is that we need to do whatever we do it heartily as to the Lord, no matter how small or insignificant it seems or how hard it is. Now I'm going to clean up my kitchen and go and help Johan at the little haven. Yesterday was Golden Oldies, so we made a triple batch of shepherd pies. So we had one yesterday, we have one today. It's already made, that's why I can go later. Usually I'd be there by now. And we have one for another day as well. And it's very wet and miserable outside.